Hello, hello. Welcome to Wizard World Virtual Experiences. Falcon and Winter Soldier break down Sidekicks Ascent or Buddy Cop Bromance. I am your host, Dr. Travis Langley, distinguished professor of psychology and other stuff. Panelist, who are all of you? And we'll go in alphabetical order, not that you have this memorized. Other Travis, who are you?
Hi, I'm Travis Adams. I'm a social worker with veterans. I'm a Marine Corps veteran myself, and I've contributed to some of the popular psychology books with Dr. Langley.
Johnson. Asher.
I am Dr. Asher Johnson. I've also been on a couple different Comic-Con paddles with Pops Culture and contributed to a couple different books. I work primarily with criminals or people who've been convicted of crimes, and I apply superhero redemption therapy to that.
And one of the panelists returning from, actually, the next three are introducing themselves. You saw 2 weeks ago. Justine.
Hi, I'm Justine Maston. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, as well as a yoga teacher. I've contributed to a bunch of the Psych Geek books, and I have my own book, as you can see here behind me, Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life. And I am a huge fan of Bucky Barnes. And, you know, Sam's cool too.
Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany Oliver Cias Navarro. I'm a TAY therapist and a marriage and family therapist and also a grief counselor.
Billy.
Name's Dr. Billy. I am a therapist, writer, and raconteur. Pleasure meeting you all.
And last, and certainly not least, Eric, who are you?
I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann. I'm a social psychologist at Illinois State University, a longtime comic nerd, film nerd. I work them into my research and my teaching whenever I can. I've contributed to several books in Dr. Langley's popular culture psychology series.
So we're going to work on the assumption that people wouldn't be here if they had not at least watched the first episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So don't worry about spoilers on this one. Or if you are worried about spoilers out there, just put your hands over your ears. I guess for the whole, no. We are here. We are live. We are talking about the continuation of the MCU. This series was supposed to be the first one to come out before the plague threw off scheduling, though in terms of chronological order, it works out better because WandaVision took place 3 weeks after everybody returned from being snapped. This one's months later with repercussions to the world, not just one town or one cranky guy at sword. So panelists, in whatever order you go, what were your first impressions of the show so far? Aside from the therapist, we'll talk about that in a little bit and just jump in and talk.
I liked it. I think it was, from a genre perspective, enough of a switch to keep my interest using the same characters that we're familiar with from the MCU.
I'm just gonna go ahead and agree with Dr. Billy. I liked the vibe. I liked that whenever we saw Winter Soldier, we got a little bit of that Captain America Winter Soldier vibe. Like all it needed was that EDM soundtrack. And then when we saw Sam had his whole vibe, and we got to get some of his backstory, which I didn't know and really appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool about this is doing the backstory for characters, just like with WandaVision, getting to learn more about the different people, so I'm really enjoying it. I loved it so far.
I really enjoyed it as well. I also enjoyed how it was sort of like a parallel process of what we as a society have been going through, being quarantined, which incidentally happened just months after the final end game ended. So we were all mourning and suffering and missing these characters as well. And so watching them go through it sort of, it sort of mirrored our own process.
I was going to say, I think that it did a really good representation of various cultures and cultural experiences. And so that's what I appreciated from real world into this kind of like fictitious land and experience. And so I think that that was fun to watch because you got to see so much unravel in one episode.
And I really liked sort of delving into this issue of what it would be like to come back after this huge like cultural trauma, right? I mean, so 5 years, the culture that was non-blipped, right, has reformed, meaning gone forward, and now suddenly everybody comes back, and it's like, all right, how do we mesh, right? And so I'm really excited to see where they go with that.
Sometimes when I talk about how it might be difficult to imagine how somebody being trapped in ice for 70 years in the movies and an adjusting amount of time in the comic books relates to real human beings. And the examples I will usually use are those of someone in prison, someone held captive or comatose. It's easier for people to see and empathize with the characters having gone through these experiences because of the completely coincidental events going on in our world. Because both of these series, WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, were planned out as post-blip events before things happened to filming the shows. And so it becomes this analogy. We've talked among ourselves and in some panels at times about how it can be difficult to talk about real life through examples of real life, but you can go through a fictional example and discuss those things in perhaps emotionally or vicariously, or it leading into other things. Do you find this useful for dialogue, or will you find this useful for dialogue? Will anybody ever use this as an example in therapy, for example? For example, yes.
It's already happening. I actually I have a colleague who, when I mentioned I was doing this panel, she said, "Oh, I wasn't going to watch that show, but a bunch of my clients have already come in and told me how much this story speaks to them." So, folks are already resonating with it. It's already being used in the therapeutic milieu. You got your $10 word, friends at home. Milieu.
Now they have to spell it.
So go ahead.
Absolutely. One of the beautiful things about fiction is that fiction interests us as human beings because we connect to it in some way. And with the blip and a lot of the things in the MCU, whether it be Wanda's grief, Winter Soldier's struggling with the person he used to be, who he's no longer, Falcon's struggle to return back home and balance civilian and military life. Every character in the MCU or whatever fragmented pieces there are of the DCU or any work of fiction, there's some piece of humanity there. And therapists use that. Therapists use it as, it can be a parallel, it can be a metaphor, you might directly relate to someone. But if it speaks to you, we want to use that to help heal whatever you're going through.
I use it a lot with my veterans.
Oh, you got an echo, Travis.
All right, better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I use it with my veterans now. Often, I'm sure I'll use this show, especially looking at what Sam was talking about with the financial advisor or the banker. And, like, hey, I'm this guy, like, this is who I am, hook me up. But when you don't have that identity and it gets stripped from you, what does it do to who you are? And then for the episode to end directly after that, the way it did, makes him fall back even more. And so, like, going to be a huge part of the show, I think, with losing the identity of who he is.
So does television have an advantage over movies in terms of conveying these aspects of humanity?
I think it does because you're able to elongate that series, and it gives the audience time to really, and the writers time to delve deeply into that psyche that's going on there. In movies, you miss out a lot. You can miss out on way too much. And I think with the Avengers in general, that whole franchise, they've been doing it for over a decade. And so we've gotten very attached to it, but that's a lot of time invested because they're such long movies. So I think that it was a very smart decision, not just on the business aspect, but just for fans to be able to really deeply delve into it without having to pick up the comic books.
I also think that the TV series or any sort of TV adaptation would be more helpful in allowing for a more human experience to show the totality of all emotion. Because I think in movies, we are so used to as a society and accustomed to this like heroic experience. We're so used to good, trumping evil. And we kind of already have this idea of how the story always ends. And with television, it doesn't have to be linear in the sense of something bad happens, then there's struggle, then something good then comes later. There are cliffhangers and there are more questions and there's conversation, and that is it resembles life, where it's not as specific, where it's not A to B, life is usually A, Q, S, P, L, whatever. And so I think that it gives it a better opportunity to describe nuance and to talk about emotional depth in a different way.
Yeah, I think when they did the Wakanda Files book, it did help fill some of those gaps that we may have missed in the movies and the moments. And I think you mentioned this before, Travis, is it gives like the TV show gives us time to digest it, to let it sit and marinate, and to have discussions of like, hey, what's going on versus I'm going to watch all 6 episodes or 9 episodes in the next 9 hours. So being able to take our time with it does help kind of reflect on things.
We saw that
different format, right? I mean, so with pre-COVID, right, films were made to be consumed in one sitting, right, in a theater with other people, at least predominantly in that first run. And so in a superhero genre, you expect to have a lot of action, right? And then there would be some characterization in between those sort of set points, right? But what I was struck by with watching this episode was that, there were a couple, sort of moments of action, some scenes, but the vast majority of the episode was characterization, right? And but if I can watch this on my own time, pause it wherever I want, rewatch it, it's a different experience.
I have a comment from Inaspinto, and I do need to ask you the pronunciation since you follow me on one of my social media accounts. Inaspinto97, just saying, I love that we got to see what happens in their life and not just the superhero Avengers. I think that goes to a big part of why this first episode to me felt a lot more like it was Sam's show. Maybe it'll feel differently later, but to me it felt like Sam's show, and I think it's because we got to see more of his life because he has a personal life.
It's very interesting too about and it's kind of going back on an earlier discussion we're having. Sam's sister is not intentionally angry with him, but his disappearance, and I think it kind of represented what a lot of these guys are going through. So not only was he being de-identified, where his status or his label of being Falcon is not getting him a relatively small business loan, but his sister is also kind of saying, you've been gone. She's not kind of saying, she's literally saying, you've been gone doing whatever you're doing, saving the whole world, but I've been trying to save this business. Now here you come trying to save it. No. And then him promising, hey, it's me, I'm the hero. Everything works together in my favor because that's my job as a hero. And then going through that humiliation of, no, you don't have the power to do this, but let me try to exploit you anyways, from the banker. I thought it was going to be more of the racial tension, but I think the writers did a beautiful job at being eloquent about, nope, this is about the disappearing superhero act and nothing else.
Well, what you said there, Asher, made me think about how what Sam went through right there compares to many veterans when they come home and they don't get the respect or appreciation, even in a so-called popular war. And in Vietnam, they were treated horribly when they came home. But even for those in which, people were for the soldiers being over there, they not getting the support, not getting why. I'm not wanting into politics, but failing to support the soldiers who've done all these things to fight for their country. And that's at many levels, where you can be talking the government level or the personal level. And yeah, most of us is going to be the hero who helped save half of all light. Well, actually, he was in the help keep Thanos from doing it again, since he was one of the half that got wiped out. But I think I made my point before I rambled a little.
I can't imagine, because I have no military history, but I can't imagine what it's like to go fight for your country and you go back home and your country won't fight for you.
Mm-hmm.
That and the married. I was not married or had a family when I was in the military, but I think one of the hardest things too that, and Travis Adams, you'll have to tell me more because you currently work with them. But in my time when I was in, what was even harder was going back to either a disloyal partner at home and coming home and being so excited during the whole tour, all this, I'm going to get back, I'm going to surprise my wife. And he was the one who actually was very unpleasantly surprised, to going home and your kids are much older now, they barely know you. And then you're trying to go back and return to the role that you once had, that you left, because all you have is fantasy. Same thing with prisoners. But then the wife or the partner who's back home is saying, hey, we've been doing this for months without you. You're just coming here trying to change everything around. Back off, macho. And very, very lonely. And I think that contributes much more loudly in a silent way than these more macro factors.
In Western society, one of the biggest examples we saw with that was after World War II, with the breakdown of family dynamics. After World War II, there was a big increase in juvenile delinquency. And over in England, and trying to understand that and looking at some of the breakdown of family dynamics that had happened because of separations during the war, help them develop attachment theory and see how interruptions in attachment between parent and child, led to some of those difficulties. The men who fight the war come home expecting to resume their old roles, and some were able to, and some the wives had a new status, the kids had a new status, and while if the spouse had infidelity on either side, there was a whole lot of soldiers overseas found ways to have sex too. Now, in the current scenario of presented in the TV series and the films, is that, well, people have been gone. Somewhere along the way in 5 years, you accept that the person is actually gone and move ahead. There have been people actually who had to make choices when a spouse reported dead at war and the person turns out alive and they have to make a choice between their old spouse and the new. While that doesn't happen to large numbers of people, it happens.
Yeah.
So Inespirito 77 had another comment. Bucky went through a lot. Now it's difficult to open up and know he found out who killed the son of that poor man. I'm sure that's why Bucky probably sought him out in the first place. I would love to know more about that story. Oh, I think we'll see more of that story. I think this. I was fast. First, I saw Izzy, and I thought, I was like, well, maybe he knew Bucky. It's like, is he pushing 100? Maybe he knew Bucky back when, but the racial issue for the time would seem to lower the odds that Bucky had known him back when. But then we find out, oh, this is what's going on. He's one of the people Bucky needs to make amends with. So speaking of the making amends, something we chatted about among ourselves so much before we came in here, I said, let's wait a minute. What kind of therapist is that? His therapist. What kind of therapy is that person engaging in?
We had a discussion about it because when we see portrayals of therapy, we either see the incompetent, rude therapist, or we see a therapist who's all rainbows and unicorns and just think happy thoughts and they'll come up true. But we seem to believe, at least I think this is the majority consensus amongst us, that they were someone either in the military or forensic, because that style of therapy, based on the population and the needs, a lot of times the therapy is non-voluntary. You have to be there because there's a purpose. For a lot of forensic type therapy, assessments, things like that, the concept of confidentiality wherein everything you say in the therapy session is strictly between you and the therapist, with very few exceptions based on safety. In the contract, there will be things that say anything that you say in this session, the court or your lawyer, someone will be privy to. And they did mention, part of you being out is, these goals, A, B, and C, and I have to report to them.
I think you forgot one of the tropes of the therapist, and that's like the one that goes against the ethics and sleeps with a client, like we've seen a bunch of times too.
Oh, we have that's of course that happens. That happens more than those other two stereotypes.
Absolutely,
especially inside the prison.
Yeah, it's one of the. I've got to learn not to put my hand between the camera. It's one of those big things where ethical issues, boards are looking at clinicians very carefully to see who does engage in that kind of activity, because it does happen. It's not just one of these stereotypes that you see on TV. It's like they think everybody's a Freudian. It does happen. Candace, before I read this next comment, I do want to throw out there to our whoever's viewing, whether you're doing it now or later on, in chat now or comments later, if you have topics you want us to get into, we would love to hear from you. We bat around among ourselves so many things we'd love to talk about, but we do want to make sure it's something you want to hear, and so feel free if you want to see, Darth Vader, psychology. That's a little limiting, but if you want to see Darth Vader psychology, we can still talk for an hour on that. You want to see, Pee Wee Herman psychology, you really better sell us on that idea. But I do want to know what all of you would like to. Sometimes people propose great topics, great sounding topics that we don't do because it doesn't grab us, or more likely, we're not sure we have enough psychological depth to bring to it, or to say that's different from things we've already talked about. So feel free to throw stuff at us. Candace Cable Barlow, I wonder how hard it would be for a World War II vet like Bucky to accept that he needs therapy. My grandfather was a World War II vet and never said anything about his experiences to anyone else. I see some of my panelists nodding here. What do y'all think?
I work with Vietnam vets right now. And when they came home, they all did the typical look for a job, couldn't find one. Nobody wanted to hire them. They drank heavily or used drugs, and then found a kind of a manual labor job where they just beat themselves up to avoid everything. And they would work long hours and then finally go to sleep, get drinks, go to sleep, wake up, do again, rinse and repeat. Now that they're older, their bodies aren't as physically capable to do things. They're finding that they do need therapy, that they do need help, and they support each other. A lot of the stuff that I do is just like how we meet Sam. When Captain America runs past him, as a peer support group, like, hey, I've been there, I've done that, and let's talk about our emotions and feelings in a safe place with people who understand.
I think that this is an important time to illustrate that culture is important and relevant. And when we talk about culture, it's not about just ethnicity. And so when we think about what was important in this cultural piece, is if we're talking about PTSD, if we're talking about trauma, if we're talking about military vets, if we're talking about that kind of world, then to approach that actual question and what are the things that limit their culture to seeking services or to receiving services. And so if it's financial strains, if it's access to services, if it's individual and internal stigma of I can't be crazy, I can't be sick, I can't be weak, or societal pressure of what does it look like to be a hero, and does going to therapy or seeking any kind of assistance make you less than. And so I think it's important to really highlight, that was a really excellent question, that there are cultural challenges for this population. And so this is why there should be a lot of efforts to assist in it in as many ways as we possibly can.
I think that's a really good point that you made, a lot of good points. And I think Bucky is, because I had that same question too. And as I was kind of assessing it myself, there's so many interesting factors that are a little bit unique or less common for Bucky. For one, he's mandated to treatment. From what I gathered, he's forced to go. And me working with a lot of people that are mandated to therapy, there tends to be a lot of resistance up front, but eventually they surrender to it. The other thing with Bucky is with the World War II, so his view of what masculinity is, that's kind of the thing for me is like, wow, his view of masculinity seems to be a lot more modern than old fashioned, except for the one comment where he sent flowers on that first date. But he's so unsure of himself because before he was the ladies' man, and then by the end of it, once in the original Captain America movie, at the end of it, when Bucky was like, man, I'm invisible now. So he's already starting to have a little bit of self-doubt. And then Bucky went through the unique experience of literally having his mind kidnapped. That trauma, and then him being a very good person, so he commits all this moral injury. He's committing crimes against himself because he's going against what he knows he would have done had he had any say so in his actions. And so because of all that, I feel like he's probably a little more towards going to therapy. Like, as his therapist said, I'm the only person you've called in a week. That's pathetic. So
at least it did say that he'd called her. Exactly.
So that's why I'm saying I think he's for it. I think for him, she's his safest place right now.
So he has a reservation about revealing things when he keeps withholding or fibbing, but he wants to change. He wants to not be what was over him for all of those years. Angela Amelia is asking something. I want to go to the first part of her question. Can you talk about the therapy aspect of Bucky's guilt / assigned amends? And that takes me back to what we were wondering earlier about what kind of therapy is this? That bit about the amends. I mean, the first part, the confrontational part, is the main thing everybody talks about with this therapy. Where some people suggested, RABT, Albert Ellis's, or William Glasser's reality therapy. So there's the confrontational side, and some therapists believe very much in being confrontational to challenge people's preconceptions, to challenge their assumptions, to make them reconsider things themselves. But what about that part about the amends? That sounds like something out of AA steps.
It does sound very much like a 12-step program. And it's got its pros and cons, because whenever you're making amends to someone, you don't know what underlying trauma is there. And we're seeing that play out with Bucky. I've heard stories of people being not forced, but I guess guilted into making amends towards parents who molested them. And it's going to be hard to go through personal growth if you don't know the full context. Not a big fan of that modality. If it works for you, it works for you.
I have not seen evidence that it works as broadly as some of those therapists seem to think, though.
Correct.
No.
There are parents who abused you who, quite frankly, the evidence indicates what you need to do is get them the hell out of your life.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what Asher said about, or maybe it was Travis A, about how there's a peer system with soldiers, because this very much brought to mind the 12-step modality, which is a peer model. And I think that's why we as clinicians find it to be less effective or appealing, because it's a peer model. It's not a clinical model. And so when I saw this therapist, I was very much reminded of other licensed drug and alcohol counselors who are kind of like more of the old guard, old school, who came out of 12-step work and still do it clinically. And so those therapists are sort of like skirting the line between being a counselor and being a 12-step sponsor. And that was definitely the vibe I got from her. And when he said to her, "You're a terrible shrink," and she said something to the effect of, "But I was a great soldier," I was like, aha, we're leaning a little too hard into the peer model, into the I went through what you went through. And so I could go on a whole diatribe about that therapist, but I won't. I cede my time. Thank you.
Have any of you heard of MRT? moral recognition therapy. That's something commonly used. It's a CBT, commonly used with rehabilitation and stuff. And I know that we all see Bucky as a soldier, but I think within the paradigm, within the context of her treatment, it's more like in exchange for your pardon of criminal behaviors, this is what you're doing. And so it is more of that forensic aspect. Or so I kind of feel like it was a little bit of an MRT approach. And in a sense, there is a little bit of amendment making where it's more about holding yourself accountable and being responsible for what you've done. Not so much of what we're seeing in that show. I think Hollywood does a great job of dramatizing and botching things up in real life. But I also don't think that the way he's doing it is really how he's supposed to be doing it. He's trying to find himself while staying free. So he is lying to her because he knows she's bound to the limits of confidentiality, but Cap's not around for him. So he needs to have someone kind of reel him in. And so I think she is going to be using that peer support thing, and she's still a soldier first, but at the same time, she is very it seems like she might be pro-government, and it's like, we're just trying to make sure that you don't go back to being, and she had this humorous, very dark, that dark humor was there. She's almost making fun of making sure he doesn't go back to the Winter Soldier. Like, just the way she said it cracked me up.
Trying to get back to the comments while we have time. Also, we're going to go until the hour because we started a few minutes late for the technical reasons. Well, Angel had also asked about the accuracy of Bucky's self-blame when he was mind controlled, since it was not something he had a choice in doing. It hits on something so unique in moral injury. People often blame themselves for not being stronger, not being able to resist certain things in their lives, whether we're talking brainwashing or not. People can carry guilt for many things they logically shouldn't. All of you, what are your thoughts on this one?
I actually was thinking about this when Justine was talking about that 12-step model and doing the amends. A lot of it he didn't remember for a long time, and he was brainwashed. And with the amends, you want to have that empathy and that, like, hey, I do want that weight off of my chest. And he does carry some of that, but how much of it based on being told what to do, and the brainwashing does play a part in that. So it's very hard, and I personally think that seeing more of that come out would be nice, and having him do that growth, absolutely.
I think that this is going to evolve into a bigger conversation about understanding that you can have duality. Like, you can be both a good person and do good things and yet have bad actions, if we want to label them as good and bad. But I think that it's going to continue to blossom into a bigger conversation, not just for his character, but for kind of both of theirs, about what does it look like if I am this complete person that's not all one thing. And I also think that watching this, I mean, it screams Brene Brown shame, right? Like, there's so much conversation about, like, or so many thoughts about, how do I see myself? How do I grieve the loss of the identity that I hoped for myself? If I want to be seen as a hero or as a good person or noble, what is it if I bump against that? And how do I have radical acceptance if I'm not this perfect person that I wish to be? I think that this is going to be something that's a thread consistently, like, throughout the rest of the conversation and the episodes, to see how do they land with it. And I think that like, this DBT skill of radical acceptance will be an interesting conversation to have from start to finish.
Jake Beckstead on Facebook has a comment, which, okay, it's partly wisecrack, but if it's a buddy cop show, there better be some whimsical saxophone music playing at the end of scenes, a la Lethal Weapon. It does, the trailers did make it look like there were going to be, faster paced jokes than what we've seen so far, but some of those classic buddy cop movies, there are some long, dark stretches, especially Lethal Weapon, which is our example, starts off with Mel Gibson about to shoot himself. Eric, you've been quiet for a bit. Any thoughts on where we're going to see the show go? Or did we
Well,
lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
No, I mean, it is interesting that, the title, of course, is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and in this first episode, they're not connected at all, right? They're each sort of suffering on their own, and it will be interesting to see how they get brought together. I mean, they're sort of they both have their shared traumas, having been through combat, right? They both have the shared trauma of having blipped, and that's one thing that we haven't really gotten a whole lot of yet. We've gotten, at least in this show, the people who are like, yeah, we've moved on, right? But we don't really hear a lot of what it's like to say, okay, what were they doing for those 5 years? Is it like they just blinked out and time has picked up from where they came back? We don't know, but that has to be also an additional thing that they have in common. Now, they also have differences, right? And in any sort of comedy or drama, you're going to have tensions between these actors, right? So they're going to have personality differences. They have their trauma in common, they have Cap in common, but they also have a lot of personality differences too. So the tension will probably be how those things play out.
You're right about that. Having them both blipped connects them. We would see that commonly. It's like the half of everybody who went through the experience will feel oddly connected through the shared experience of having missed 5 years. There may be their support groups that they don't want somebody who was around here the whole time to be there. Let's see. And it's been 97. Want to know about the man who put on Captain America's suit? Like, why? We'll get some of that. I mean, that's going to be a character named John Walker, who's super patriotic. In fact, he had been called the Super Patriot before becoming a replacement Cap in the comics. Of course, what kind of gung-ho guy who hopes to be a superhero wouldn't love to be the next Captain America? Millennial Queef, I want to hear more about this red bean mochi. Does it have literal red beans? The old man, that's Izzy, mentions it once and nothing is said again. Do we know anything about red bean mochi?
Travis, I'm so sorry. My connection was a little spotty there. Who
No,
did
it
that
was
question
not.
come
No,
from?
it was not.
Thank you, whoever you are, for commenting.
Mm-hmm. Do it again.
I don't even remember the question. What was the question?
The question
Red bean
is.
mochi.
Oh,
Oh, here's where the comedy comes in. Somebody's username. It's like, yeah, what can they get Dr. Langley to say?
And you did it so perfectly too.
Well,
But
then
you're-
Billy blows my straight delivery. I want people wondering.
No.
Now that we've
Not a
done this,
single
can't
one
we
of
get
us.
back? Okay. Danielle Stashevitz, again, I apologize if I'm not saying it right. Actually, MQ had she felt it was a metaphor for the red blood Bucky spills and the fact that he's a little bean Captain America. Could be. The choice of red is often a meaningful selection in storytelling, in film. Okay, Danielle, can we talk about what Sam and Bucky are gonna do to get that shield back? And we know that if you watch trailers, we know they're going to try to get it. If you watch this, you saw the trailer. We know they get it back because Bucky slams it into a tree and Sam can't quite get it out. It's this I think is the inciting incident, even regardless of all these other things, but this is what brings them together to do this show. And it is what unites these guys even before the blip, is that they were both Cap's partners or sidekicks, depending on how you look at it. Although in the comics, Cap was always partners with Falcon. He never called him a sidekick, never thought of him that way. Sometimes Falcon definitely felt like the secondary partner, because how can you not with Captain America? And Bucky was a sidekick. Even though the films, he was Steve's best friend, not just a camp mascot. And so they're different in the dynamics. So they were united through Steve, and they will both feel a bond, to a need to get that shield back. And Sam now gets to kick himself, and Bucky may try to kick him for having given the shield away. Maybe I'll have thoughts on that one.
Yeah, how dare you give our best friend or boyfriend's totem away? That was our pin. You don't give the pin back.
and I think Travis and Asher. Oh, sorry.
No.
Go ahead, Drew.
So I think that Sam was kicking himself in the teeth as soon as at the end of the episode, because it looked like on his face he was expecting to hear his name being called out as Captain America.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Doctor.
that it goes a lot with guilt that he has already. He has guilt from being gone for that 5 years. He has guilt because he doesn't have income, right? Which is why they get turned down on that bank loan. He has guilt for turning it over and then somebody else taking the mantle because he didn't feel he was good enough. I really think that's what it comes down to, is not feeling like we're good enough. Struggling with my sense of self, right? So I want to be Uncle Sam now, right? Versus Falcon. Billy just got it. But I want to be Uncle Sam now, right? So I want to have this different type of character. I want to have my family, but I still want to help out those good causes. And I think going with the Shield, it is a piece of their bond. And to just kind of hand it over saying, hey, I'm not good enough, but nobody else is either. That's why it's going to the Smithsonian.
And I think
go ahead.
it's not just the Shield as an object and a representation of their friend, but also a representation of what they were fighting for. He was Captain America. And I don't know if Travis and Asher have any thoughts on this with their experience and work with veterans. These are two very, very different characters. One is a solemn, brooding, tragic figure, and one is a wisecracking family man. And these two dissonant personalities are going to come together based on their love, not just of their friend, but what the friend stood for that patriotic duty towards the country they love. And I'm sure that happens a lot with the very different personalities that go into the military and who are veterans. We're different.
You get turned into friends by default. You work with these guys, you live with these guys 24/7, you're with them, and you have a full inherent trust that they're going to keep you alive, and they have the same for you. That bond is very difficult to find anywhere else. And some of the guys I work with say, hey, if I can't get that bond with this person, I don't want them in my life. So to have these two veterans get together and have the banter, because that's some of the best stuff I love, especially in like Civil War. Like, I hate you. When Spider-Man knocks his arm down, could have done that earlier. Just like that banter. Or can you move your seat up? No. Just type of stuff. It's just great, and I love it, and I want to see more of that for sure.
So do you like cats? But sorry, that was another funny one. But you're absolutely right. And when I went from that world into psychology world, educated world, it was a really hard adjustment for me socially, because my joking and bantering meant I trust you and there's a good relationship here, and everyone else was like, get that guy away from me. It was hard, and I had to learn. But
We're approaching the hour. The main suggestions I've seen from anybody for future topics are for Arrow and Snyder's Justice League. We'll get into Snyder's Justice League for part of next week's topic, which will be Snyder versus Whedon versus you. So, panelists, where can everybody find you online, or not your home address, online, social media? Where can people hunt you down?
I figure we'll go in the same order.
Sure.
I'm on Twitter, the Marine_Peer, PEER. And just one thing that was said earlier about people not knowing the resources. There are veteran resources out there that are free if you have people looking for help. The Vet Center is primarily veterans that work there to talk to other veterans with that peer model, but as clinicians.
Asher?
Instagram at Dr. Asher Johnson.
Oh yeah, most of us have a lot more places to find online, but you're a little more secretive about this stuff. Justine,
you're hidden.
Social media, website, your book.
Yep. You can find me at blueboxcounseling.com, starshiptherapies.com with an S, just like the Enterprise. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom. And please pick up my book that's available for pre-order at all of your favorite booksellers, called Starship Therapies, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life.
I really liked her delivery on that last part too. Brittany.
I'll be somewhat mysterious like Dr. Asher. Find me on Instagram at Be Therapeutic.
Billy.
You can find me online on Twitter and Instagram at BILLI_SENSE. That's Billy Sense. That's where you can find me on Twitter and Instagram.
Eric.
You can find me on Illinois State University's Department of Psychology page. You can also find me on Twitter at Eric Wesselmann. And you can find some of my writing on film and psychology at Film Culture, Cult, all caps, the Normal Theater.
And I am, Dr. for, Dr. Travis Langley on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm at Superherologist on Twitter. And even as we come up upon, the end of the live stream, we're going to keep chatting among ourselves, and we'll record it in case we say something worth listening to. I'll post it on our Comic-Con Fusion channel. And so I thank you, panelists, all of you, for joining us. Thank you there online. And
thank you, Millennial Queef.
And everyone else as well. Thank you all.